What's up, ladies and gentlemen, how's it going? It's Dan here from Cryonoir, and welcome to another edition of my game making journey. So at the end of the last game making journey, I decided to part ways with my my business partner who I'd been working with for, I don't know, maybe a year and a half, probably about a year and a half, and we've been working on a game together, and I basically decided that I no longer wanted to A, sort of do pixel art games, and B, didn't want to work in Game Maker Studio, and we'd had to go with Unity, and I decided it was time to cut ties and to just go straight for Unreal Engine and start developing 3D games. So without further ado, let's just crack on and see how I got on. It'd been nearly 4 years since I last tried Unreal Engine. 4 years since I'd last been impressed by the promos, and then gone out, built a PC and jumped right into it. I'd done 2 tutorials from the Unreal YouTube channel and then started playing around with the engine on my own. For reasons laid out in one of my earlier game making journey videos, I'd walked away and decided to go 2D, forsaking the third dimension. I'd spent countless hours practicing my pixel art skills and learning GML. Now it felt like the circle was complete. It was time to return to Unreal, but this time I was returning with a much deeper understanding of game development. I am far from what you would describe as a good programmer, but I have butchered and chopped together enough words, semicolons and curly braces to make what some would describe as a fully functioning games. Now it was time to try with Unreal and C++. I'd done some C++ tutorials nearly half a decade ago and remembered getting to the point where I was able to execute some very simple math functions. With my experience in GML and in Game Maker Studio, I'd hoped that I'd have quite the head start over 5-year-ago me. For me, the best way to start is doing tutorials until you have a grip on the engine and then start prototyping. Ordinarily, I'd recommend hitting YouTube. However, over the years I'd acquired a lot of courses through Udemy, ranging from HTML to SQL, pixel art to Blender. I mean, that's not a huge range, is it? It's just different game making resources. Anyway, I know a lot of people grief Udemy, and I know that they have their issues, including that guy that keeps insisting that coding your own games is easier than you think. But most of the courses I've done through them have been far better than anything that I've found on YouTube. Over the years, I picked up a couple for Unreal, hoping that the day would come when I was a full-time developer and it was time to move on to a bigger project. With a team of employed developers working with me, some disillusioned AAA burnout casualties, and some keen young game jam kids looking for their first break, all working out of a small office on a cheap industrial estate, living off pizza, vodka and bad language. Well, that hadn't quite come to pass. But I had spent altogether too long staring intensely at small squares doing pixel art. It was time to go big or go home. I had 2 courses in my archive, Ben Tristram's Unreal Engine C++ developer course and Christopher Murphy's Unreal Engine for How to Develop Your First 2 Games. The second one seemed to be the most beginner friendly, and as it was the shorter of the 2, it looked like a good place to start. It began with an intro to the engine and a quick section on blocking out using basic geometry. This was then followed by building a living room scene. Now, this might look like a huge leap to gloss over, but this room is literally just a box with a large triangle, some textures on the surfaces, a bit of lighting, and a few pre-made assets thrown in. There was a good section though on adding dust particles to the scene and applying reflection masses and ambient occlusion. The amount of time spent fixing and fettling these to make it look half reasonable really did drill home to me the savings to be had from ray tracing, but that's a topic for a different video. I felt pretty good after making this room, but it was quite far from being a game. Next came the most ambitious thing I've ever tried to do in Unreal, a pinball game. First we learned how to make a metal ball using the materials editor and program some logic so that it would accelerate to a max speed in a given direction along the x-axis. This plan was not that dissimilar to other projects I'd done in 2D. Rather than using the game engine's built-in gravity settings, it's better to create an object with a force built into it directly. That way you have far greater control over its behaviour. Next we added an additional force designed to propel the ball down along the y-axis to try and keep it anchored to the table. This provided a lot of potential for messing around with a ramp, as always. After that proved to be working fine, we added some pre-built bumpers provided with the course and drew a spaghetti diagram to make them repel the ball if it collided with it. Then we applied a graphics texture to the bumpers to make them look like, well, bumpers. Next up we did a blueprint for the bumpers animating once they were hit using graphs and the such. I've got to be honest, I only kind of knew what was going on, but as this was only the first time I'd used blueprints within 5 years, I figured it'd start to make more and more sense the further on we got. A bit more blueprinting, and now the bumpers were flashing when they were hit and making sounds. We then imported a pre-built flipper and coloured it. Screen upon screens with a blueprint, and we had the flippers working as they should, and we did some modifications to the table to feed the ball to them. The addition of a channel at the side of the table and a plunger to fire the ball up and into the table, and it was really starting to look like an actual game. A bit of logic later and we had an out of bounds blueprint that would reset the ball once a player messed up. The next part of any pinball game is a scoring system. We set it up to track the player's score and then to print that on the screen. When the player had run out of balls, a text box would appear and the player could type in their name that would then go into a high score list. And I never got that working. I scanned over page after page of the diagram with lines leading off boxes with 3 more lines leading off that one, and I had no idea what any of it meant. The problem was something to do with promoting a node to a local variable or something. I mean, I don't know. I'd spent about 15 hours working with Blueprint, and I could not tell you how to do one single thing, or how to even start bug fixing it. I don't know if it's just because I'm used to writing lines of code, but I could just not get my head around this mess of lines and blocks. At least when code doesn't work, I know where to start. Engines usually at least tell you what line the problem is on. Check for typos, syntax, grammar. Are there any words in the editor that hasn't coloured signifying that it's a variable or a function that it knows? Track where the code is referencing and go and check those scripts. Here I didn't even know what I was looking at 90% of the time. All the while I was using Blueprint, I kept thinking one of two things. One, how I could write this a shitload quicker with just a few lines of code rather than these big flow diagrams. And two, you can't tell me that when BioWare was making Mass Effect, they had screen after screen of Blueprint for whether or not Shepard had sided with Jack or Miranda, or blueprints to check if Shepard was renegade enough to punch the reporter in the face.
I've had enough of your disingenuous assertions.
I mean, there's just no way. It had to be done through code. I mean, surely. The whole time that I'd been working in Game Maker, or Unity for that matter, every time I copied some code during whichever tutorial it was I was doing, when we moved on to the next section in the tutorial, I at least could look at the code that I'd copied and explain how it worked. Here, I'd nearly built a full game and had almost no idea how it worked. I mean, it's no real biggie, I told myself. I had only done this tutorial to learn my way around the engine. I was sure I could just start doing some tutorials using C++ and I'd be right back in the hunt. I decided to start the other course that I'd lined up. This one was entirely based around C++ and really should get me on my way. In the intro lecture, one of the opening lines was, "We're going to assume that you have a reasonable understanding of how C++ works in this course, and we'll run through the actual coding quite quickly. If you've never coded in C++ before, we recommend you take our C++ course for beginners first, so you know how it all works before jumping into this course." Now, this might have just been an effort to upsell me one of their other courses, but it's really not what I wanted to hear. The whole reason I was doing this course was to learn C++ in the first place. I just spent hours fumbling around in the dark with no idea what I was doing, and now it looked like I was on for more of the same. I'll be honest, I was really at a low ebb at this point. I just had 3 weeks off work over Christmas with the intention of dedicating mass amounts of time to transitioning over to Unreal. I'd pretty much run out of time, and I was nowhere nearer than I was 3 weeks ago. I felt completely adrift, and I had no idea what I was going to do next. Okay guys, thank you very much for watching. I hope you made it all the way to the end. If this is the first one of these you've seen, it's been a long series, there's a lot in there. Plus there's also lots of devlogs on this channel and lots of other videos about retro game collecting and just other general shenanigans within the gaming world. So please check out some of my other videos, and if you could hit the subscribe, that would be pretty cool. So yes, thank you very much for watching guys. Please hit the comment, the likes, the subscribe and all that kind of stuff. E-beggy beggy, e-beg beggy beg e. Cheers guys, thanks a lot, take it easy, I'll see you later, bye bye.
Coding your own games is easier than you